The UP Woods is full of tasty wonders. I'm heading out to see what I can round up for dinner. And I'm in Delta County for a look at the return of the black tern. 9 million acres of forest, 1,700 miles of continuous shoreline, 4,300 lakes, 12,000 miles of streams, more than 300 waterfalls, 15 counties, 2 time zones, and 1 area code. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula. Welcome to 906 Outdoors. .906 Outdoors is brought to you by Cooking Wild Seasonings. Make it fresh, make it yours. The UP is certainly host to a wide variety of forest edibles. When we think about wild edibles, I'm sure mushrooms are the first thing that come to mind for most of us. More specifically, and this time of year, morels. But with a little research, you'll find there's a lot more out there than just shrooms. So I did some research and set out on a mission to collect, cook, and enjoy some tasty UP wild edibles in the comfort of the outdoors. Where does the camper fit into this adventure? Well, it started about a month ago, when I decided I would do some turkey season camping. So I hooked up the Silver Bullet and headed to one of my favorite non-campground camping spots. Typically when I say turkey hunting, I really mean filming turkey hunting. I tag along and do my best to capture someone's hunt on film. This season was going to be different. I would be hunting, and, well, filming too. My son Jason stepped in to help with the filming as well. We hunted. And hunted. And hunted again. Had some close calls, but Mr. Turkey beat us by a nose every time. I decided to leave the Silver Bullet in the woods. Kind of a home away from home. A remote base camp of sorts, a place to go when I need to relax, cook over a fire, or just hide out. So when I hit the woods to see what I could dig up, pull up, and pick for dinner, my woodsy hangout was the obvious spot to call the kitchen. The first item on the menu, dandelions. Before you start to wonder how I cook dandelions, I'll tell you right out, I didn't. There are a number of ways I discovered that I could have prepared them. You can use the greens to make a salad, or just fry them up. You can make wine or jelly. My plan was to dip the flowers in batter and deep fry them for a snack. Unfortunately, by the time I even got to the woods, they were already wilted beyond recognition. Next on the menu, cattails. Like dandelions, there are a number of ways you can satisfy your hunger on cattails, and all parts from the roots to the flower heads are edible. Which part you want to try revolves considerably around the time of year. It's spring, so I was targeting the fresh shoots at the base of the stalk. The pollen at the top can be collected and used as a flour substitute in pancakes or breads. The flowers are best eaten in early season when they first spike up from the leaves, kind of like little cobs of corn. You can saute the leaves in butter. In the fall or early winter, dig up the roots, dry them out, and they can also be used as a flour substitute. Next on the list, spruce tips. Spruce tips are the new spring growth at the end of the branch and are pretty easy to find. They're everywhere. These tender and tasty springtime sprouts offer up citrusy flavors which can vary from tree to tree, so I'm told. Can't say that I've ever eaten a spruce tip, but we'll give it a try. Now it's off to the hardwoods for another versatile and easy to find menu item, leeks. Dig them out with a spoon, or a knife if you forgot to bring a spoon, being careful not to disturb more ground than necessary. Also, if you recall a past show with Shiitake Matt, do not overharvest from a single patch. Skip around a bit, grab a few here and a few there. Usually it's the white to light green parts that get eaten, but you can use the darker green parts as well. Their sweet oniony flavor is a bit more subtle than green onions. You can eat leeks in a variety of ways. Slice them up for a garnish with meats or fish, add them to your salad. Basically anywhere you would use an onion, you could use a leek. I just think they're better because I didn't have to plant them. My handful of leeks were destined for some sort of sauce to accompany tasty breast of grouse fried in a pan over a fire. 906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by Blades Bait and Tackle, your year-round connection to fishing Bay Enoch. Time to cook. We'll start off with some campfire bread. Pretty simple. Flour, baking powder, pinch of salt, a couple tablespoons of butter, and some water. You can make this bread in a Dutch oven, a frying pan, or even wrap it around a stick and prop it up next to the fire. Time to prepare the main course of the meal, ruffed grouse, or partridge as many of us tend to refer to it as. Grouse conjures up thoughts of fall, a cool day quietly sneaking through the UP woods, eyes sharpened looking under every tree. With a little luck and some hunting expertise, you can bag a bird. This one hit the back window of my house. I like to keep the marinade simple, stuff I have on hand. Garlic, a piece of an orange left over from last night's old fashioned, and some of the leeks I picked. Today's seasoning, cooking wild breakfast seasoning. Yes, you can use it for more than breakfast sausage. Mix well with a hot beer I found in the camper and let it do its thing. Time to check the bread. Now I've made this bread more than once. Sometimes it turns out great, sometimes it just doesn't. Most of the time I tend to add too much heat and too little attention and end up with, well, this. Here's an example of what cooking it correctly can look like. Now here's something that may not necessarily fit into today's lineup, but I had to give it a try. Spruce tips. You can toss them on a salad, make syrups, jelly, even beer. There'll be no salad, and I don't have time to whip up a batch of spruce tip beer, so jelly it is. Sounds like it's similar to making any sort of fruit jelly, which I know nothing about. First step, chop them up and let them boil. Good time to prepare my cattails. Like spruce tips, I've never done anything with cattails, other than filming birds sitting on them, so this is an experiment. I'm using only the bottom 8 inches, peeling away the green to get to the hearts of the stalk. Supposedly raw, this part tastes like a cucumber. I'm going to boil them up. Now that my spruce tips have boiled long enough, we'll strain off the liquid and see what it looks like. Spruce juice. Add some lemon juice and bring it to a boil. Add sugar and pectin, and we're on our way to spruce jelly. Maybe. Now for the leeks. As I mentioned, you can eat them in a variety of ways, but today we're going to turn them into some sort of leek cream sauce and pour it over those marinating grouse breasts. Some butter, some olive oil, saute the leeks for a couple of minutes. Toss in some garlic and let it go another couple minutes. Add some chicken stock, salt and pepper, and let that cook till almost all of the liquid is gone. Heavy cream. Now it's starting to look like something I want to taste. 906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by Christ, your Northwoods neighborhood store. Before finishing up dinner, I took the time for a walk in the woods. Well, all in all, it worked out pretty good. My spruce tip jelly apparently didn't do what it was supposed to do. I'm sure there's a bunch of jelly makers watching right now who know exactly what I did wrong. Maybe I can use it to soften up that bread. I'm pretty sure it's destined to become a spruce tip margarita. And you may notice I'm eating with a pair of tongs. Yes, I forgot a fork. The grouse topped with leek cream sauce was better than I could have imagined. I'll definitely be using leeks more often. I do need to do more research and experimentation on anything cattail. And maybe on the next round we'll try some deep fried dandelions. Take some time, do some research, and see what you can cook up with a simple trip to the woods. The supply chain is pretty reliable, the cost never fluctuates, and it's bound to be delicious. Today's show is brought to you in part by Rapid River Knife Works, home of Michigan's largest custom knife factory showroom.
Here we go, here's an adult right here. So there's two pairs that are nesting at the mouth of the creek here, Portage Marsh. And so both of these have young that are fully fledged. And they're colonial nesters, so when they get an intruder, whether it be a heron or a boat, canoer, whatever, they'll come and do like alarm calls. But since we're in the middle of the channel, black tern doesn't need a lot of excuse to be upset. Hey, this morning we're in the Portage Marsh outside of Escanaba, Michigan, and we're celebrating a success of sorts. This is the first time that black terns have successfully nested in the Portage Marsh in at least 20 years. Primary reason for that is for the last 15 years, Portage Marsh has been almost bone dry as far as water, and this is a bird that requires floating dead debris in order to place their nest. They're the smallest of the terns that nest in Michigan. There's 4 other species. The other 3, foresters, common tern, and Caspian tern, all nest on rocky shoals and sandy islands. But black terns are unique. They're mostly a prairie species, but they did formerly range throughout Michigan. But declines in the Great Lakes have been about 70% decline in the last 30 years. So now that we have them back in the Portage Marsh, it's something to celebrate. As birds were recruiting into the colony, sometimes you'd find like the primo habitat was already taken, and so the marginal areas didn't really have enough vegetative mats. So we started putting out these little PVC platforms, and we were finding that the terns would take to them, and we're using time-lapse cameras to actually monitor the success of the nests of these platforms. So basically what we were finding in Ogon's Bay as water levels came up, there was a limited amount of dead vegetative mats that were suitable for nesting. So the birds that were coming in early were occupying those nests, and they're fairly tolerant since they're colonial water birds, but they were filling out probably every 10 meters or so. Some of them were actually less, and that provides protection for the whole colony. But there was a limited number of mats, so what we did was make these little PVC squares, 9-inch squares with foam in the middle, and we were putting those kind of on the outskirts of the colony. And what we were finding in like late July, mid-July, that new birds were coming in, settling on those platforms, and then laying eggs and being successful hatching off of those platforms. And what we found is the larger ones that we did, the 2-foot square that really worked well in Wisconsin, didn't tend to do well in a high-use marsh like this because we get muskrats on them. Sometimes herons would land on them. So what we did is we shrank it down based on the size of a natural tern nest, which is about 9 inches square. And when we put those out, they worked fantastic. We didn't have a single failure on any of those nests, determined by time-lapse photography. The terns will nest on floating debris, but they'll also use like old muskrat dens and things like that. But they're at risk when they use something, substrate that's harder, because of things like muskrats. We had mallards that would come and roost with their young, and that was displacing the terns. So they had no interest in the tern nest, they just had interest in the same spot the tern was using for nesting. So it rolled eggs into the water. So the quality of the habitat for these guys is going to be determined what happens over the winter. If these cattails, if we don't get an ice shear or heavy snow to push down this season's growth, these birds won't have vegetative mats to nest on. If you can get snow, heavy snow loads to push all this down, it makes for great substrate, not only for nesting terns. I mean, terns are just a sensitive indicator, but that also works for ducks and grebes and other water birds, coots, rails. You really need the floating mat, last year's dead vegetation, to create good habitat for these birds. So, you know, one of the management tools that we're considering, because our winters become more mild, is going in on the interior of these cattail marshes during the winter and basically shearing off these stems, this year's growth, to let it pile up, because then it'll be available in the spring for these birds for nesting. There we go. See, it's young? Right there. Just took out of the cattails. You see, these guys are molting. So they're end of the season. And so when these black terns return in the spring, they're jet black below, except for under the tail is immaculate white. Their wings are gray, the top side. But after they're done with nesting, you know, as hormone levels go down, decrease, birds, because they fly, they have to replace their feathers. So you'll start noticing these birds molt. And another really great example is like the breeding plumage of common loon. You know, they're black and white and expressive in the summertime. In the winter, when they're down on the ocean, they're just gray and white like so many other seabirds. So people that live up here, when I talk to them about, oh yeah, our loons winter in Florida, and they say I never see loons, because they're looking for breeding plumage loons. Same thing happens with these terns. And you'll notice the adults, their faces will start to turn white, and then they'll replace all the black feathers. That black breeding plumage will be completely replaced with white, so that they almost look like the juveniles, which are all white below and gray above. But the difference is the juveniles have a shorter forked tail and there's no black underneath. Next year's birds, you see them occasionally back in the breeding grounds, but the majority of those birds probably stay on winter territory, down on the ocean, and then will return the year after in this full sort of black and white plumage ready for breeding. So life history of the black terns, at least in this area, is fairly straightforward. You'll get birds returning from Central and South America. They'll make it up here for breeding, usually about middle of May. So peak breeding up here on the northern lakes and in these coastal estuaries, these coastal marshes, is typically like the first week of June. And if a pair of adults are successful, they'll lay 3 eggs on a floating mat, and it takes 3 weeks to hatch the chicks. And then another 3 weeks of feeding them dragonflies and small minnows and beetles to get them to the fledging state. And then once they fledge, typically families or birds move out pretty quickly, and then it's right back down to Central and South America for the winter.
Feel free to join us on Facebook or visit us at 906outdoors.com. Thanks for watching, and we invite you to join us next week for another adventure right here on 906 Outdoors.